This is not a story about pain. This is a story about rising after the pain. A story of a woman who forgot her worth and then remembered it so loudly that the whole world changed around her. If you're hearing this tonight, maybe you were meant to. So take a deep breath, hit the subscribe button, and let me take you inside the life of a woman who walked through darkness just to find her own light again. Every home has secrets, but some secrets don't just hide in the shadows. They spread through the walls, slowly taking the light away from a person's life. And today, we begin the story of a woman named Vanessa. A woman who spent years living in silence, thinking her quiet suffering was love. But this is the journey of how she finally stood up and reclaimed her freedom. Soft cinematic music rises. But before we start, if you're here for the first time, hit that subscribe button, support the channel, and get ready for one of the most emotional, powerful, and eye-opening stories you will ever hear. Music shifts into a darker, slow tone. The sun rose like any ordinary day. But inside Vanessa's home, nothing felt ordinary. In the kitchen, she stood alone, hands trembling slightly as she stirred her tea. She wasn't scared of the morning. She was scared of the moment. Her husband, Terence, would walk down those stairs. Every footstep of his always felt like thunder. Footsteps approach. Terence entered the room without a greeting. He never said good morning, never asked how she slept. He just threw his phone on the table, hard enough to make the cup shake. Vanessa forced a small smile. "Good morning. I made tea." Her voice was soft, as if any louder sound might trigger a storm. Terence ignored her kindness, the way a cruel man ignores the sun. He looked at a bill on the table and snapped. "Didn't I tell you to cut down expenses? Why can't you listen?" Vanessa swallowed her words. She wanted to explain. She wanted to remind him she barely spent anything. But she knew better. Answering him was like lighting a match near gasoline. So she stayed silent. That silence was her survival. Terence grabbed his phone to leave. But as he lifted it, the screen lit up. And Vanessa saw it. A name. A woman's name. Angela. The notification disappeared quickly. But not quickly enough. Her heart tightened. Her breath paused. And Terence only said, "I'll be home late. Don't ask questions." Then he walked out. The door closed. And suddenly the whole house felt colder. Vanessa sat alone on the couch, 1,000 thoughts pounding inside her head. Who is Angela? Why is he always late? What else is he hiding? But more painful than all those questions was the realization that she had no one to talk to. No one who knew her truth. No one who understood her life. She was a prisoner in a house decorated like a home. She walked to the mirror, looked at herself, and for the first time in years, she saw a woman whose eyes had lost their shine. "How did I get here?" she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a cry. A quiet cry from a woman who had been carrying too much pain for far too long. And that day, something inside her cracked. Just enough to let a little light through. And that day, something inside her cracked. Just enough to let a little light through. Not enough to give her strength. Not yet. But enough to make her realize that a life lived in fear is not a life at all. Vanessa walked back to the dining table and sat down slowly, hands wrapped around her warm cup of tea, like she was holding on to the last bit of comfort she had. Terrence had left the house only minutes ago, but it already felt like the air had become lighter, as if the windows had finally opened. After years of being sealed shut, she whispered to herself, "I deserve better than this." It was the first time she'd said those words out loud, and just hearing her own voice say something so forbidden felt like rebellion. Her eyes drifted to her phone on the counter. For years she avoided calling anyone about her marriage. She feared judgment. She feared the shame. She feared the consequences. But today, fear wasn't the only thing speaking inside her. Her fingers slowly reached for the phone. She didn't have a plan. Didn't know who to call. But her heart guided her. She opened her contact list and stopped on a name she hadn't dialed in months. Denise. Her older sister. A woman who always told her, "Call me when you need me." And Vanessa never did. But today, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, "Vanessa? Oh my God, are you okay?" Vanessa's breath cracked. She didn't sob. She didn't fall apart, but her silence said everything. And Denise heard it. Denise's voice softened. "Talk to me." What happened?" Vanessa swallowed. Her throat burned. Words felt heavier than the bruise on her heart. I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere," Denise whispered. "I'm here. I've always been here." Vanessa looked at the window. The sunlight slowly moving across the floor. Like time itself was waiting for her to speak. And then she said the words she had hidden for too long. "He isn't who he used to be. And I think I'm losing myself." Silence, but the kind of silence that holds someone gently. Then Denise replied, "I'm coming over." But before Denise could leave her house, before help could arrive, the front door burst open, hard enough to rattle the walls. Terrence. He wasn't supposed to be home. He had no reason to be home. But there he stood. His eyes sharp. His breath fast. His anger already simmering. "Who were you talking to?" he demanded. Vanessa froze. The phone still in her hand. "No one, just don't lie to me." His voice was low. Dangerous. Like a storm gathering strength. She hid the phone behind her. But he stepped closer. "Let me see it," he said. And Vanessa's heart pounded. So loudly. She could feel it in her fingertips. He reached for her wrist. Tight, controlling. The way he always did. But something happened. Something neither of them expected. Vanessa pulled her hand back. Not a slap. Not a scream. Not an act of violence. Just a simple movement. A refusal. And Terrence stopped. It wasn't a big motion. It wasn't a fight. But it was the first time she had ever resisted him. And that tiny act shook the ground under both of them. Terrence stared at her. Like he was looking at a stranger. "Who do you think you're becoming?" he whispered. Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't look away either. And for the first time in years, Terrence wasn't the only one holding power in the room. Terrence held her stare a little too long, as if trying to search for the old frightened Vanessa inside her eyes, but that woman was fading, disappearing like smoke in the wind, and he didn't know how to handle the version of her standing in front of him, the version who didn't tremble when he raised his voice, who didn't lower her gaze when he stepped closer, and the more he looked at her the more unsettled he became, because control only works on someone who believes they're powerless, and today for the first time Vanessa didn't believe that anymore. Terrence's breath grew uneven, anger trying to rise in him like a reflex, but confusion pushing against it. She wasn't supposed to push back, she wasn't supposed to question him, she wasn't supposed to have this quiet burning strength in her eyes. He finally muttered, "You think this changes anything?" But even he didn't sound convinced, and Vanessa slowly stepped back, not out of fear but out of choice, creating distance he could no longer command, and her voice was soft, steady, almost painfully calm when she said, "Everything changes once you stop being afraid," and those words sliced through him sharper than any argument, because she wasn't threatening him, she wasn't begging, she was simply telling the truth he had hoped she would never discover. And Terrence's face shifted for just a moment, the mask slipping, revealing something dark, something afraid, something desperate, and he snapped, "Don't test me, Vanessa." But she didn't move, she didn't react, and that lack of reaction was more powerful than any resistance she could have shown. It told him he was losing his grip, losing the silent control he'd held over her for years, and he hated it. He hated the stillness in her, the quiet certainty, the way she stood like a woman who had survived something far bigger than his anger, and she knew he felt it, saw it, sensed it, because when Terrence finally stepped back even by an inch, she felt a wave of something warm rush through her chest, not victory, not triumph, something deeper, something she hadn't felt in so long, hope. And that single inch he retreated became the moment she realized the cage around her had a crack, a way out, a path she had been too scared to see before, but now it was right there, shining like a sliver of dawn breaking through a long cold night. And Vanessa breathed for the first time in years, a real breath, a free breath, while Terrence stood there trapped in his own crumbling control, unable to accept what he had just witnessed, a woman he thought he'd broken standing tall again. Terrence stood there trapped in his own crumbling control, unable to accept what he had just witnessed, a woman he thought he'd broken standing tall again, and the silence between them grew heavier, thicker, wrapping around him like a truth he couldn't escape, because for the first time he wasn't the storm in the room, he was just a man, exposed, small, insecure, stripped of the power he thought he owned. And Vanessa watched him with a calm that unnerved him even more, a calm that said she wasn't afraid anymore, a calm that said she finally saw him for what he was. And Terrence took one shaky step backward, not because she scared him physically, but because the version of her standing in front of him was something he never expected, a woman reclaiming herself piece by piece, breath by breath, and he couldn't stand it. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing, muttering under his breath like a man losing his grip on the world he built around her. Control, obedient, silence, but her silence today wasn't fear. It was strength, a quiet defiance that didn't need shouting or tears, and that terrified him more than anything. He snapped, "You think you can just change overnight, Vanessa?" But she didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The truth was already written all over her face, and Terrence felt it like a door slamming shut right in front of him, shutting him out of a world he used to dominate. He grabbed his keys, his movements sharp, frustrated, desperate, and he said in a voice that tried to sound strong but cracked around the edges, "We'll finish this later." But Vanessa knew it wasn't a promise, it was an empty threat thrown by a man who felt his power slipping through his fingers like sand. And as he walked out the door, slamming it so hard the walls shook, she didn't flinch, not even once. Instead she exhaled, slow, controlled, steady, and that breath felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years, because she finally understood something deep and undeniable. She wasn't the one falling apart, he was, and she wasn't the one losing control, he was. And for the first time in her life she stepped away from the window, put a hand over her heart, and whispered to herself, with a strength she had buried for far too long, "I'm not done, not anymore." Vanessa stood in the quiet house listening to the fading echo of the slammed door, and for a moment she let the silence settle around her like a blanket woven from every tear she had swallowed, every night she had stayed awake pretending everything was fine, every apology she had whispered to herself just to make it through another day. But today something shifted inside her, a steady calm rising from a place she thought had died years ago, a place where her identity still lived quietly, waiting to be remembered. And as she walked into the kitchen she saw her reflection in the dark glass of the microwave, not broken, not defeated, just tired, tired of fear, tired of pretending, tired of shrinking her voice to survive. And she whispered to that reflection, "I see you. I'm coming back for you." Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and picked her phone back up, the same phone Terrence tried to snatch from her, the same phone that had become her only connection to the outside World. She scrolled to Denise's name again, her finger hovering for a second because a part of her still feared the consequences, still feared Terrence's anger, still feared the fallout, but another part, a stronger part, now whispered do it. So she pressed call, and the moment Denise answered, breathless, worried, urgent, Vanessa finally spoke in a voice that trembled with truth. Denny, I think I need help. And that was it. The words were simple, small, but they were everything, because asking for help was something she had never allowed herself to do, not once in 18 years, and Denise didn't hesitate, she didn't question, she didn't judge, she simply said, I'm already on my way. And Vanessa felt something warm inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't felt in far too long. Safety, not physical safety but emotional safety, the kind that comes from being seen after years of being invisible. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, her hands shaking, not from fear but from release, the release of finally letting the truth surface, and she whispered into the quiet room, I'm not alone. Not anymore. And outside the house the world continued as normal, cars passing, birds singing, wind brushing through the trees, but inside the house, inside Vanessa, something new was beginning, a transformation, not loud, not dramatic, but powerful, like the first crack of dawn after a long winter night. And somewhere deep in her heart she knew this was only the beginning of her return to herself, the beginning of the end for Terrence's control, and the beginning of a story she was finally choosing to write herself. It was the beginning of her return to herself, the beginning of the end for Terrence's control, and the beginning of a story she was finally choosing to write herself. And Terrence felt it, like a tide turning against him, slow but unstoppable. He opened his mouth to speak, to command, to pull her back into the cage he built. But his words collapsed before they reached the air. Because for the first time, she wasn't listening. For the first time, her heartbeat wasn't racing from fear, but from freedom awakening in her bones. And he realized, far too late, that once a woman remembers her worth, she never forgets it again. And he realized, far too late, that once a woman remembers her worth, she never forgets it again. Terrence stood there, silent, small, a shadow of the man who once believed he controlled everything. Vanessa didn't shout. She didn't explain. She didn't justify her freedom to someone who never valued it. She simply turned away. Not as a victim, not as someone escaping, but as a woman finally reclaiming her own name, her own breath, her own life. Terrence reached out, not to hurt her, not to command her, but out of pure, helpless desperation. Vanessa, don't go. She paused. Not for him, but for herself. To feel the moment. To acknowledge that she was no longer the woman he once controlled. And then she said, in a calm, steady voice that carried years of silence behind it, I'm not leaving you, Terrence. I'm leaving the version of me you created, and walking back to the woman I was meant to be. Terrence's expression collapsed. Because deep inside, he understood. Not just that she was leaving, but that he could never undo the strength she had found. Vanessa walked to the door. Each step, a piece of her life returning. Her courage, her voice, her spirit, her worth, all rising again. She opened the door, felt the night air touch her skin, and for the first time in years, she breathed freely. Behind her, Terrence whispered her name. One last time. But she didn't turn back. Because women who rediscover their worth don't return to the places that taught them to forget it. She stepped out, down the stairs, into the world that had been waiting for her. And with every stride, she wrote the first lines of a life she finally owned. Not a life controlled. Not a life diminished. A life chosen. A life reborn. A life hers. Sometimes the strongest chapter in a woman's story is the one where she finally realizes she wasn't hard to love. She was just loving the wrong person. And when she chooses herself, Her entire destiny changes direction.